Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Move fast and break things may be the mantra of Silicon Valley, but when it comes to regulating artificial intelligence, the implications of that approach extends well beyond the server room. The Valley isn't the only power center for this technology, and the risk of damaging Canada's competitive advantage is real. Ottawa's next move could either light a rocket under Canada's innovation economy or send our best ideas and talent south of the border. While Washington wrestles with the bruising politics of the United States, Canadian firms see an opening, welcoming disillusioned U.S. researchers, build trusted AI at home, and export it to the world. Yet trust is built on regulation, and too heavy a hand risks smothering experimentation just as the algorithms begin delivering real-world returns. On May 27th, the C.D. Howe Institute will host an AI regulation conference titled Seizing Opportunities for Canada. In advance of that, meet Anindya Sen, economics professor at the University of Waterloo and Institute Fellow in Residence.
So the point being is that we already have a great system of local innovation in the country. Very few countries have that. And build that further out with a bit more government funding so universities and the private sector can come together. But more importantly, use that as an attractive way to get top researchers from the United States to move their labs here. If we do that, our potential is boundless.
And this is Rosalie Wyonch, the Associate Director of Research at the C.D. Howe.
The overall goal, making Canada a global leader in AI, is that we need to find, shall we say, the Goldilocks regulations and rules where it's not overly onerous or difficult for companies to be compliant
And flourish. Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to ensure that the things that are being developed and commercialized fit with Canadian values and are not causing harm.
They join us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Canada has a first minister for artificial intelligence. Anindya, does this give you confidence that Ottawa will tackle the issue of AI head on?
A lot of confidence. I was a bit surprised to see that announcement, but extremely happy. I think that single move signals a lot, signals that AI is a priority as it should be in terms of regulation and development in the country. And having a minister who can push it as a separate file is a significant boost to the country. So I was very pleased to see that announcement.
Now, Rosalie, we know that red tape throttles innovation. Where's the line between responsible oversight and outright obstruction?
Well, I'd say that this is an actively growing space where new tools and new technologies are being developed every day. And so you don't want to put a damper on that development, but you do want to put, shall we say, guidelines or draw the red lines in the sand of what we definitely don't want. But you don't want to be super prescriptive at this stage with exactly the how and the why that needs to be achieved. It's really just about ensuring that there are proper guide rails and that the companies can have certainty about what will or won't be allowed and what they need to develop their algorithms to achieve, but at the same time don't have to artificially force functionality into a regulatory box. So from that perspective, I think we should lead with the principles and sort of the broader picture of what you want to not happen, and then regulate around those bad outcomes, as opposed to maybe on the other end saying this is how the AI should function or this is how it will work.
So, Anindya, do we just adopt the 3 laws of robotics from Isaac Asimov? What are the guardrails?
I think this is a really exciting opportunity for Canada in terms of defining guardrails. The reason why I say that, as you and I'm sure most of your viewers know, we have the Biden executive order, which laid down some very clear principles for AI development in the United States: safety, trustworthiness, in addition to competitiveness and innovation. On the other hand, what's also really interesting is that you have the European Union, and what the European Union, what they've done is that they've gone ahead and defined fundamental principles, defining pillars for AI regulation, privacy, security, dignity of human rights, and so on and so forth. But what I think, and I'm coming to your point about guardrails now, but what I think is that this is really a golden opportunity for Canada to come forward and develop Canadian specific regulation, which makes sense in terms of balancing trustworthiness and safety, but also encouraging innovation. And I think that it should be done, as you said, Michael, taking into account the talent which we can have from the United States now. Because what's missing worldwide, and this kind of punchline, is some type of regulation which allows governments to balance the trade-offs. That here, let's measure the innovation from this type of development and deployment, but here are the costs. And we see these benefit and cost tests in many types of regulation, but not in AI regulation. Canada's always been a pioneer in this, and now Canada can step up and be a model for the rest of the world, as opposed to trying to mimic regulations from other countries, which may not be the best fit.
We've seen that in the past. GDPR was brought on board courtesy of the European Union, and because they imposed those regulations on global companies, the global companies, regardless as to where they were domiciled, just adopted those regulations. Does Canada find itself on the back foot now that Bill C-27, including Canada's Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, died on the order paper when Parliament was prorogued? Are there aspects of that a new government should be bringing back, or do we start from scratch or just let the Europeans take care of it?
The current uncertainty, there was the potential for legislation, and then it died on the order. And the new minister has signaled that they do intend to bring something forward. And so I'd just say that the longer the uncertainty persists, the worse. But at the same time, you want to be careful and prudent about the regulations you do put into place. And maybe one aspect that I'd add, it's somewhat an answer to the question, but also a bit of riffing off of your last answer, is that I don't want to give people the impression that just because we don't have a specific AI piece of legislation, that this is a completely unregulated space. Where the applications are being used, there are regulations that exist already in industries. We already have a human rights code. There are already laws against things like fraud. And so there are a lot of the potential bad outcomes that are at least partially already covered by existing rules and legislation. And so I would maybe ask the question for what the new legislation will be. The question that I think is important is, what are these new rules specifically targeted at preventing or achieving? And how much of that is already covered with existing legislation or tweaking things that we already have?
I think that was great. And I'll just build on that. So, Michael, to your question, I think the best thing which happened is the death of Bill C-27, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. The reason is because it was really vague. And there's a lot of criticism of it because it didn't take into account stakeholder values or responses. And so the reason it was criticized, there are many reasons. One key reason was that it didn't specify the pillars which it should be built on. And also, so for example, when you look at the European Act, it's very specific: privacy, human rights, dignity, so on and so forth. And once you build those pillars, what the Act does is that it specifies high risk. So if you want to make sure you have good innovation in the country, along with safety, what you should do is you have to define some activities as high risk, intermediate risk, and low risk.
What's high risk, medium, and low risk in your mind?
So I think the Europeans have done a really good job. So when you think of high risk, you have the possibility of governments engaging in social scoring like they do in China, for example, or biometrics, or, for example, surveillance, unauthorized surveillance. That's considered high risk. And especially if those activities are scalable. That's a main thing about the AI. It's so scalable, right? It can impact populations. Then just below that, you have intermediate risk, which is, for example, AI used in electricity grid systems, so on and so forth, right? And then the low risk or no risk at all are the spam filters you have in your email. So the Europeans were very specific in laying all this out. They have an annex to their act which specifies how you should consider different activities. The Canadian Act did not have that. So, I really think this is a really good opportunity to step back now with a clean slate, especially given that we have flexibility. The Americans don't have anything. So that gives us some room to maneuver to take into account that, look, a big deal is cross-border data flows, right? That's kind of key out here in terms of training algorithms and models. So how do we come up with some legislation which protects privacy in Canada, but also is conducive to data flows across the border, which can be used to train everybody's models in a trustworthy and safe way? So I think that it's going to be awfully complicated, but in a sense exciting. There's some exciting opportunities out there.
Anindya, what are the key strengths of Canada's AI ecosystem as you see it today?
I think that Canada has always been a world leader in development. The weakness has been in deployment and in terms of maturity. That's why, University of Waterloo, we have such great ideas. But a lot of our students, as you know, go to Silicon Valley and they scale up their businesses out there. I think what needs to be exploited, and if the government, the federal government is listening to this, or the provincial government is listening to this, is that use the universities. I mean, the University of Waterloo has a great ecosystem of innovation. If the governments come forward, the professors, the innovators, and the students, more importantly, the best ideas come from students, they work with the funding. And we have an ecosystem out there which allows companies to be birthed and flourish, okay, to some extent. So imagine if we could replicate that model across the country. So the point being is that we already have a great system of local innovation in the country. Very few countries have that. And build that further out with a bit more government funding so universities and the private sector can come together. But more importantly, use that as an attractive way to get top researchers from the United States to move their labs here. If we do that, our potential is boundless. It's limitless.
Does that require a tweak, though, to immigration and tax policy to vacuum up those U.S. People?
Michael, you provided me a pretty perfect segue, because I was going to say that's one of maybe the key public channels is our strength in R&D. But we really do have struggles with, commercializing, or even if we commercialize, then a lot of Canadian businesses tend to stay small. And so I'd say, I think I agree that Canada has an opportunity to really be a global player. We don't necessarily need to follow the European lead, but I do think it's important that we keep global competitiveness in mind, particularly when the US is going less regulation as opposed to more, and that is where a lot of our tech innovators end up going. And part of that is because they might face lower administrative burdens. If there's no regulation, you don't have to spend money on ensuring you're regulatory compliant or dealing with certain risks. And that saves costs for those small businesses that are trying to move fast. They aren't necessarily trying to break things, but if there's things in their way that they can avoid, they will. And also the US has some big market advantages. It has investment capital for growing and scaling businesses that maybe Canadian small businesses have more difficulty at accessing. And so I guess just to bring it back to the overall goal, making Canada a global leader in AI, is that we need to find, shall we say, the Goldilocks regulations and rules where it's not overly onerous or difficult for companies to be compliant
and flourish.
Yeah. But at the same time, we need to ensure that the things that are being developed and commercialized fit with Canadian values and are not causing harm. So it's really about, I think, good that the legislation didn't go through as it was, but this is a perfect time to actually have a much more nuanced conversation about what we're trying to achieve, and that it's not just about the risks. It's also about the potential for growth. But that brings in a much broader set of policy considerations around our IP policies, our commercialization, access to capital. And so that is an entire, we could do books, many podcasts on it. We can't cover it in half an hour, but I just say, I think it's very important not to forget that this isn't just about risks. It's also opportunity.
I will point out to you in some specific policy levers, building out what Rosalie just said. So in terms of immigration, I think it has to be nuanced immigration policy. We need to focus on, I think the colleges do great jobs in certain occupations and training, but if we want to focus on engineering and AI, then it's the universities to the most case. So we need to cater the immigration policy around that with respect to students. If we're trying to get the top US researchers here, moving their labs should be seamless, right? Which means that they want to bring their students out here. So that's something else. Taxation, I don't think anything has to change. You're in Canada, you have great public goods, you have to pay taxes. Now, but the other thing is the intellectual property. Most universities, if a professor is in the university and they start a company, then the IP has to be shared with the university. Waterloo's different that way. The IP resides with the professor. That's extremely attractive. The other thing is money, not necessarily in terms of salary. I think that Canadian universities, a lot of them are pretty competitive in salaries, but the key thing here is for AI Minister Solomon, if I can call him out, is to start injecting capital in to universities, saying that for star researchers, maybe in Europe also, but star researchers, and I'd like to see what you think of this, right? That star researchers who are interested in trustworthy AI, your home is Canada. And we're going to give you an initial grant of $250,000, maybe over 2 or 3 years, with some top-ups later down the road, not for salary, but to recruit students, to maintain your lab, and for computing power. If people see this signal, academics will come, especially if we emphasize trustworthiness.
I think I'd say I like that idea, but I'd question potentially the opportunity cost of what else I might do with that money. We can get more good talent and advanced researchers, but it's not like Canada doesn't have a ton of talent domestically and good AI researchers already. And so I think I might suggest that we might want to think a little bit further down the development pipeline. So not necessarily direct research, though I would totally agree on your technology transfer offices. And so I guess there's a couple of parts to my response. I think one is that you've really highlighted that it's not actually just a federal government approach. It's an intergovernmental approach, even to the institutional policy level. And so I think if we want to think about making the ecosystem better across the country, this is a Team Canada approach. And so we can't just say this is the new minister's responsibility, or it's the provincial government's fault, or the universities need to go on an active. It's not any one thing. It's all of the above. So we need to, I think, yes, a Team Canada approach, while also, maybe looking at our own policies and seeing if they could be, at each institution, could they be adapted to improve innovation and the opportunities for the students or professors that are at these institutions, I think is absolutely critical. But I'd also say that maybe in the past, governments have focused quite a lot on research dollars, and Canada is actually already an exporter of research, but we then import the products that research has contributed to the intellectual property development. And so when we're paying for some of the development, but then we don't necessarily capture the economic benefits of the commercialization, I would put a focus on really creating the growth and scale ecosystem. But again, that does come back to questions about access to capital and where is it going to come from.
I got 2 great follow-ups on that. And I think those are very good points. Like when you think of policies, right, I think that the injection of capital should be in terms of public goods. So for example, in Canada, we're also a leader in quantum computing, especially at the University of Waterloo. Quantum computers are awfully expensive to develop and test, right? But imagine, and there have been movements out here, but imagine if we could make quantum computing research facilities more accessible. The Institute of Quantum Computing tries to do that in Waterloo, but try to make it pan-Canadian. The other point is that what do you need for AI? You need data. Now, Canada has extraordinary research databases, Statistics Canada especially, but only researchers can access them. If the private sector tries to access them, it's really expensive. There's such great data held by the hospitals. It's so hard to try to get them to do your research.
Which, by the way, is probably more available to researchers in the US than it is in Canada, because our hospitals, a lot of the companies that run our electronic medical record systems are US based. I will just, sorry, that interjection I think is important in the whole geopolitical thing, where it's like Canadian data might actually be more accessible to researchers in the US.
Ironically, right?
Ironically.
But imagine if we already have Statistics Canada, but imagine if it became Statistics and AI Canada. So the point being was that with proper privacy and security guardrails, a legitimate private sector firm, which is not sending the data outside of the country, which follows all the rules and regulations, can access the millions of observations which are held in the Statistics Canada data repositories. That is the fuel. That is the fuel of AI. Something like that would make it so exciting for researchers to come to Canada, especially if Canada then goes forward and strikes up deals with the United Kingdom and European Union for more data sets. So
it's like I actually have an example of something that is currently, like, there are places where stuff like this is happening in Canada. So one of the downtown Toronto hospitals has actually used AI to create synthetic data sets of patient data, but then because they are synthetic, it protects patient confidentiality and those other guardrails that we might be concerned about. But it also unlocks that data for researchers, but also it can be corporations can access it, but there is a charge for that. And so it's actually, there are examples of a Canadian hospital leveraging the patient data that they do have to actually generate revenue that immediately just goes back into our hospital system. And so that's just, there are examples of those things happening already in this country, even though we don't have specific rules and regulations about it. And there are public goods to be had, but also there's the potential to, generate revenue that then serves our public services as well.
And share data.
I was like, sorry, Michael, I know you've got more questions, but we're riffing now. So this is going to happen. I was like, I think you made one other point.
This is the geek equivalent of a Fish concert at this point. It's just non-stop noodling on the guitar.
We've been nerding out over a decade during this point. So it's all right. This happens. But I was just, the one other thing where I'm going to be like, yes, but I'm going to flip it. Instead of Statistics and AI Canada, why is it just AI? Because at the end of the day, it's an advanced numerical probabilistic analysis.
Sure.
So it's really nerdy stats. Actually, as the definition of AI has evolved, it turns out that we didn't call it AI in econometrics, but some of the methods that we got taught in statistics are now considered AI methods.
Machine learning, yeah.
So I would just say AI is one specific subset of what is a field of research, a method of analysis, and potentially generalized tools that can be applied in a whole bunch of different industries. And so I don't necessarily, I think that this conversation, though we're talking specifically about AI, leads to a broader conversation about our technology and innovation ecosystem. And I'd maybe ask the question of, how is AI particularly different than some of the challenges we've discussed apply a lot of other areas?
It's been so nice to have you on episode 1 of 493 of our AI deep dive here on the CD Howe Institute podcast. I'm being facetious, but let me ask you this. If there was one priority that you wanted the new Minister of Artificial Intelligence to focus on day one, what should it be?
Clearly defining Canada's AI Federal Act.
Provide certainty and look at our AI regulations in combination with all of our other existing rules.
Thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Thank you.
Always happy to do it. We'll be back. We'll nerd out some more.
And Rosalie, I think for the purposes of disclosure, you have a particular relationship you need to disclose following this conversation?
Professor Sen taught me public policy back in grad school. And so you knew me back when I knew nothing. I just knew theory. I didn't know anything in the real world yet.
How does it feel to have the student sit next to the master?
No, the student is the master now. As professors, we live to be teachers. And I fondly remember Rosalie. She's one of my best students ever, if that means something. And to see her where she is now, it just brings me immense joy and satisfaction. And she's changing the lives of Canadians every day through her work. So it's a great feeling.
Thank you so much again for your time and insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anindya Sen is an economics professor at the University of Waterloo and fellow in residence at the C.D. Howe Institute. Rosalie Wyonch is the associate director of research at the Institute. For further insight into the intersection of artificial intelligence and public policy, and to join us May 27th for our AI Regulation Conference, visit cdhowe.org. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us. None of this was written by ChatGPT.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhowe.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.